All right. So Mateus
Mateus Guimarães.
Guimarães. I feel like I missed it.
Guimarães.
Guimarães.
Oh, that's solid. That's really good.
All right. Stop recording. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for taking the time out of your Monday to come chat with me. I'm excited to hear about your origin story. So let's just dive straight in. The very first question that I'm always asking now is, where did programming start for you? So, like, where did you first use computers? Where did you first start programming?
If I started using computers pretty early, but mostly games and this sort of thing. I think programming came to my life. I don't know how popular this game was in North America, but in Brazil, Ragnarok was a pretty popular game. Probably the most popular game between, I want to say, 2002 until 2009 or something like that. So everyone was playing that, and we had the official servers, but they were you had to pay, so they were pay to play, um, and lots of people couldn't afford that, so we used to play on unofficial servers. And back then we had a big open source project called Iathena, which was it wasn't a copy, like it wasn't a leak of the official server. It was basically someone rebuilt it from scratch by reverse engineering it. And we also had a Brazilian fork of that called Cronus. So that was probably my first actual experience with programming, was setting up those servers. I didn't really know what I was doing. Like, I was just following a tutorial, and you had to compile some C stuff and change some TXT files and the sort of thing. Um, so, I was a kid. I was what? I want to say I was 9 or 8. So I wasn't really sure what I was doing, but I remember, playing with some code, changing some hack stuff to change, for example, the game's title on the menu bar, this sort of thing. And then from that, we would also spin up some websites for servers and this sort of thing. And then my actual, like, sure, I had some experience with Cronus, but I didn't know what I was doing. I think my first conscious experience with programming, where I sort of knew what I was doing, was um, there still is a farm platform called Envision Powerboard, just like PHP and vBulletin. Um, and lots of servers use that. So I started learning that, and first I started learning they have their own templating engine and the sort of thing. And I started with that, and it still is a PHP application. So from that, I started to learn how to build plugins, this sort of thing, and I guess that's how I got into programming. It was definitely the forum platform.
All right, very nice. So video games are seem like a pretty common road into programming, so far as I can tell. Um, so who was it that sort of encouraged you to start using the computer? Was it just like you just discovered as a kid? Did one of your parents sort of push you in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, we had it wasn't a good computer, but we had a reasonable computer at home. Um, and I mean, I guess I've always used it, mostly for playing games, and there's a lot of time, obviously, but I got into online games pretty early. Um, I can't recall why. I want to say that Ragnarok was the first. Um, but I got into online games pretty soon. So I can remember joining a forum called Hackers at 2005. And I was 7 back then. I had no idea what I was doing, but I got into forums pretty early, and I think that was a significant event in my life, this sort of thing. Back then, people who only know Twitter won't relate to this, but back then you had these forums, and they were relatively close. You had to register, and you always built a community similar to what some Discord servers have nowadays, I guess. Um, but it wasn't the same thing, because it was instantaneous. It wasn't like, "Hey Sam, let me ask you something," and you're gonna reply immediately. I was gonna post something, and you would only check it on the next day, and then I would get an email saying, "Hey, Sam just replied to this." So um, some forums would close, and then some members would invite me to a new one, and this sort of thing just kept happening. Uh, so I think I deviated a little bit from the question, but I think forums were like my first experience with an online community, and people that I didn't know in real life, you know, and actually making friends online. That was the first thing, and from there it became online games, that sort of thing. But Ragnarok was like the constant. It was the game I've always played. I played Ragnarok, I want to say, from 2004 into 2012 or something like that. So throughout many games, Ragnarok was always there. It was a pretty popular game in Brazil, so that made sense back then. But yeah, I guess the answer to your question is Ragnarok was the first online game I actually invested a lot of time in, and it's still being the game for a while.
Gotcha. So, like, in a way, your push to programming kind of came from your online community, right? Like you wanted to be more involved, and so you started learning programming stuff for Ragnarok in order to be more involved.
A little bit, yeah. That for sure. Spinning up custom servers and that sort of thing. Again, obviously, I didn't really know what I was doing. It was kind of pattern matching. I learned, okay, if I want to change this item, I got to go to this file, and then we have this property, and I can change this. And then you go, well, if it works for this item, it probably works for all of them. Um, but it didn't really know what was happening behind the scenes. And for forums, the reason was mostly because we would maintain these forums, and we wanted to make changes to it, either to the template or add a new plugin, or add, we used to call InVision PowerPoint, call them hooks. Uh, so you just kind of had to learn it. That was the only way. That's also something that's very different nowadays. Like, I'm not, I wasn't there in the beginning of the internet, but back then, 2005 to 2012 or something like that, there were not a lot of full-blown tutorials like we have nowadays. It was a lot of sharing between the members of the community. So I would contribute with something, and then Sam would contribute with something else, and then someone else. We would have a lot of small resources, and that's what was so cool back then. Everyone was willing to help, and it was cool to help. And I think that's actually one of the reasons I like teaching nowadays. Because in these communities, it was natural to contribute. So I would pick something from this PHP thing here. I would pick something else from JavaScript from this other guy, and I had this um, vast, very brittle knowledge, if you will. Like, I didn't know anything profoundly, but it could make things happen. Um, so yeah, forums played a big part when it comes to web development and this sort of thing.
All right, so you're getting involved in online games. You're starting to build, modify forums. Did you end up getting into any sort of um, like more official programming courses in school at all before you reach like university college age?
No. So when I got to high school, I kind of farms were not that big anymore. It kind of died down a little bit. And I was just playing games. Like, I was completely wasting my life with games. And then when I was on my second to last, when I was on my second year of high school, and I don't know if it maps 1-to-1 with the U.S. high school system, but we have 3 years here. On my second year, um, I started to get some interest again in programming to be able to make some applications. One of the things I wanted to make was I wanted to make an app that allowed citizens from my city to report things like uh, problems with traffic lights, problem with their streets without electricity, this sort of thing. Um, so it wasn't very much of a, okay, I want to learn programming. It was more of a, I want to build this app. What do I need to learn to make that possible? Like, what's the least amount of information I need to know to be able to spin up an application that gives you a map and you can click on stuff and add an occurrence like, hey, this street is without electricity, or you have a broken bus here, that sort of thing. Um, so I still remember a little bit from this forums day. So I knew like I knew what I had to download to make a PHP application. For example, I didn't know how to set up PHP from scratch, but I knew I could download something like WAMP that would give me Apache, PHP, and MySQL. Um, I knew the basics of PHP, and more importantly, I knew where to look for things. So I already knew of Stack Overflow. So I would go, okay, I need to make a map. How can I do that? I would search how to, embed a Google map. Um, and from there, I would just keep trying things. And it took me a while to get it right. But little by little, I managed to complete this app. And when I had this app made, I realized it wasn't a very good app, but it got me hooked into programming. So the app was never really used, but it was a good experience to learn how to build that sort of thing. And then on my last year of high school, two things happened. First, um, I met a guy from another city that had a company and they wanted to pivot. And he reached out to me and we started working on something together. That was on my last year of high school. And I also started freelancing for a guy in Portugal who I'm always going to be grateful to. Um, there is a platform called Fiverr. I registered on it, and this guy reached out to me and say, "Hey, do you know how to make mobile apps?" I'm like, "Yeah, hell yeah!" And I had absolutely no idea. So he said, "Okay, we need this," and then he presented me with some scope and whatnot, some requirements, and I had absolutely no idea how to make an app. Um, so I remember, I think it was like 200 euros, and he paid me half first and half after he delivered it. So I had to learn, okay, how do I make an app? What do I use for that? Um, I barely knew how to code. And I remember I used something called PhoneGap. I don't know if it still exists. That was built with Cordova, which allowed you to do, like, most people probably won't remember this if they're new to programming, but it was a web view, and then you could compile it, kind of like React Native, but a very, 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 very embryonic version of that. Um, and the app was like, internally, it was awful, but it worked. It looked sort of good, and that got me my first client. So things were starting to work.
Nice. Okay. So you get on Fiverr, you meet this guy in Portugal. He's looking for an app. An app's an app, programming, right? So you go for it. First of all, huge props for that. There are a lot of people who would not go for that, and I'm really proud of you that you did. Cordova, man, that's a blast from the past. I haven't heard that one in a while. So you build this app. You've never built a mobile app, and you build it, and he's satisfied with it.
He was. I mean, was it great? It wasn't great, but it worked. So they had this app was for a cafe in Portugal. Um, they already had a WordPress application, a WordPress backend. And what they wanted to do was just a simple app that clients can use to log in and to, whenever they purchase something, they gain points. And with those points, they can redeem something at the restaurant. So it was pretty straightforward, but man, it was awful. Like, there was no authentication. The authentication was when they submitted the login form, it would send that into the query string, and then the server would reply with rendered HTML if the password was correct. But there was no hashing. There was nothing. But yeah, so let's say that it was supposed to take 3 months. It probably took six. Um, but he was happy with the result, and from there I built two or three more applications for him. Um, no longer using Cordova. I was using Ionic on the last three, which was so much better. And then by the time I already sort of knew how to do things, so for example, on this first application, I had no idea what JSON was, so I was just returning HTML from this WordPress backend, and that was it. On the newer ones, I was already familiar with Ionic. I knew what JSON was. I knew how to compile them on my computer. For this first one, I remember that since I didn't know how to compile them locally, I was using a service by Adobe. Uh, I think PhoneGap was maybe the service name that used Cordova. Uh, but it was I really had no idea what I was doing. I was just trying things and hacking things until it worked. Um, but he was happy with it, and we formed a great partnership. So I can't recall if we did 3 more or 4 more, but it was pretty fun. I remember doing an application for a soccer team um, that had it allowed both um, fans to check out news and those sort of thing, and also players to log in and say things like, "Oh, I won't be able to come to the training session" or something like that. So it was pretty cool.
Very nice. All right. So Ionic is also an interesting one, right? That's based on Angular JS early prototypes. Maybe not early prototypes, but early versions of Angular JS. So that's pretty cool. So you've built these apps now. You started making some money from programming. I've heard this from other people. Like you start making the money from programming, and suddenly that's like the hook for it, right? Like suddenly everything's real when someone's willing to put a dollar amount on it. Um, so you're approaching the end of high school. You've been programming essentially professionally, like for real, professionally at this point. Where do you go from high school with programming?
Right. So I was building this app with this guy Matt, who's now a great friend of mine. Um, and basically, he had a company that did. It was basically a platform for you to see events happening in your city. So let's say that you're in Austin, Texas. You want to see everything that's going on in Austin. You want to know who's hosting the parties. You want to maybe get into a key or something like that. It had a lot of usage, but it didn't make any money. So he was looking for a partner to help him build an actual ticketing platform. Um, and I started working with them mid 2015. So I finished high school end of 2015. I started college early 2016, and we launched in April, if I'm not mistaken. So in April, I was a partner of his. We had the company actually, we had the software working. This was already a Laravel application. So I was already past the, embryonic PHP, just hacking things stage. I had dabbled. Oh, I also did some Rails freelancing, which was something I didn't know as well. Some guy said, "Do you know Rails?" I said, "Yes, I didn't know Rails." Um, and it worked well as well. But this was already a Laravel application. I was already subscribed to Larcast, which made, dude, like, it literally changed my life. So we had this working application. It had started to get some clients. Um, it didn't make enough money for me to pay for my bills or anything like that. So I was going to college. I wasn't super happy with college, mostly because I wanted to focus on this application. That's what I wanted to use my time for. Not because I think it's useless or something like that. It's just, at that time I wanted to focus on that. I had so much fun. I still have so much fun programming. And this application, I would spend all of my weekends, I would spend my nights, I would spend my mornings. That's all I did for quite a while. And I think honestly, that's the period of my life where I advanced the most as a programmer. Because when you're a solo founder, I was the only technical guy. You don't, I wasn't on Twitter back then. I wasn't part of any community, so I had to figure things out by myself. I had to learn how to use Vue. I had to learn how to use Redis. I had to learn how to use queues, all this sort of thing. I had to learn. We also had a mobile app for this company to authenticate tickets. I had to learn how to use WebSockets, all of that stuff. But anyway, uh, I was going to college. I wasn't super motivated. I was doing the least I could do to get by with it. It was just a miserable experience. I had to take a bus at 1:20 p.m. at 35 Celsius, which I have no idea how much that is in freedom units, but that's pretty hot. It was packed. Like, I hated doing it. And then I had started recording videos. So my first videos on YouTube are about test driven development, and they're from 2016. My English is not super good. I speak very, very quietly. But the reason I wanted to do these videos was to first improve my English, and secondly, since I already had that experience sort of sharing on these communities, on these forums, I knew it was a good way to learn things. Because if I want to talk about something, I'll have to do some research. And it's an excellent way to kind of, go a little bit further on something you have some knowledge of. So I was already making these videos, and it didn't really have any expectations. Not a lot of people were watching, but it was fun. Every now and then someone say, "Hey man, thank you. This was awesome," and learned something, and I would get pretty happy and pumped up. And then in June of 2016, I saw a post on Reddit on for hire, someone asking for a Laravel developer, and said, "Hey, you know what? Let me apply to this." Again, no expectations. Brazilian guy, you know, not so good English. I w- 18 years old. I wasn't really expecting to go nowhere. And then the dude replies and said, "Yeah, let's talk." And we'll go for an interview. And the guy recognized me from my videos. Like, "Oh, I watch your videos." I'm like, "No way." Um, so we just skipped the entire interview process. And he said, "Hey, do you want to work on this?" And at the time, I thought it was like a joke because it was so unreal to me. I was doing those freelance gigs, getting paid, 300 euros per project. Each project would take, I don't know, months. So essentially, I was getting paid, I don't know, 100 euros a month. And then this guy saying, "Do you want to work with us?" And the pay was, I think it was 35 bucks an hour. So it was a lot of money for an 18-year-old kid in Brazil, right? That's unreal. And I said, "Yeah," and said, "Okay, cool. I'm going to send you the contract and you can start next week." And then we left the call, and you know, until I received the contract, I thought like he's gonna change his mind. He's not gonna go through with it, right? There's no way. And then when the contract came, like, okay, maybe this is serious. Um, I'm not sure. Let me give him some time. So I was in vacation from this was college break, so I was in vacation from college. And I got into this gig and I started working with everyone. And I hadn't been paid yet. So, like, you know what? Maybe this is a scam. Maybe the guy's not going to pay me. And then they paid me. And then I realized that I could make some serious money out of this, right? Um, 35 bucks times 2,000, that's 70,000 bucks a year. Uh, Keep in mind, I'm a kid from Brazil. Average salary in Brazil is much, 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 much lower than that. Um, but that was a blessing because it made me realize that I could do these things. If someone was willing to pay me $70,000 a year to do something, it meant that at the very least I wasn't terrible at it. Um, and then I started working at this company. It was an agency, but we had a main project, and I stayed on this project for a while. So that was mid 2016. I dropped out of college. I was still working on my company, which was not making money. I mean, it made some revenue, but we also had lots of expenses. And then in 2017, I moved from my city in the north of Brazil to São Paulo in the southeast, um, to focus on the company. So that was um, my life got really crazy because I had my job, the US gig, that I had to work 8 hours a day, and I also had my company. So I would go to the office at 8 in the morning. I would work on my US gig, and then I would stay until 10 p.m. in the office working on my company. Um, and I was saying that Monday through Friday, and also working on the company Saturdays and Sundays. So that that was a thing for a while. The US gig came to an end in I want to say August 2017. Um, and then I said, okay, I'm gonna go all in into the company. I had some money saved for an 18-year-old kid. I was making like completely irresponsible. I did spend much more than I should have. I should have had saved a lot more money, but I had some money saved up. Said, okay, I'm gonna make it back. But maybe this is gonna work. The app is good. We have a good product. I don't see a reason for this not to work. And then I went all in into the company. Um, Sadly, it didn't work out. So in 2018, I was pretty much broke. And then I had to look for another gig. And a friend of mine whom I had worked with on this company, it was a great coincidence because I wasn't actively looking for anything yet. And by the time I was starting to get nervous about my bills, I got to pay for stuff. He reached out and said, "Hey, are you working somewhere?" I'm like, "No, I'm just working on my company. And do you want to work with me?" I'm like, "Sure." And then I started working with him. So um, it's funny because I've never had a job in Brazil. All of my jobs have been in the US. And it's interesting because sometimes I see people going, Brazilians especially. I don't think I have what it takes to work for a US company or to any European company. And something that I forgot to mention is before I got my first US gig, I was applying to jobs in Brazil, but no one would hire me. They go, "You're either too young or you have to move," or, something like that. So it's not that it was jobless because I wanted to. I couldn't do it. I couldn't get a job. And then since my first actual job was for a US company, I've never had that barrier of, I can do this. I can't get a US job because I already had it. Um, it was a strike of luck, but it was beneficial in the sense that I realized I wasn't limited to work in Brazil. Um, so long story short, I started working with this friend of mine. It ended in 2019, and then someone I worked with in that first gig also reached out to me, and I started working on a new project in 2019, which was pretty cool. It was much more technical, a little bit high scale, this sort of thing. And basically, all of my jobs have been through, besides the first one, have been through references. Um, Someone I worked with, or someone who saw my videos, or something like that, reached out to me, and I got into it. Sorry, that was a little bit lengthy. I'm very long
No, no.
winded, but yeah, that's pretty much how it went.
Okay. So just to put things in context, so let's kind of scroll back for a second. So you are working in college. You really want to you want to do programming more than college. Totally understandable. I mean, for me, that was also my experience. Um, but you get this gig with this US company, $35 an hour for an 18-year-old in the US is actually incredible. Like, so when I graduated college, my first programming job out of college, I made $30 an hour with a college degree. So just so you know, that wasn't an insanely good job you had, in case you hadn't already figured that out. But so yeah, so you land this job because you're making videos, which is also incredible. You're using the videos to level yourself up. You're increasing your English. You're, displaying your capabilities while also raising other people up alongside you. But the job eventually comes to an end. As 18-year-olds, we make decisions with our money. We all did it, but you still saved some. So you were able to lean into this company, and now that kind of is coming to an end, and you're kind of now getting references to your next company. I have a couple of things that I want to kind of dig into before we keep going from there, though. So have you done by this point, like you've done some stuff with like forums and stuff like that? Have you done much in terms of like open source software at all at this point?
No, I started contributing to Laravel, I want to say 2017. Mostly for things. So even though I had this job, I would say that the real driver of my skills, like the thing that was leveling me up, was my company. Um, Simply because I had no one to reach out to. I didn't have a coworker that could help me. I didn't have a technical leader. I didn't have anything. So I had to figure things out by myself. And I started making some very subtle contributions to Laravel, nothing major, just small fixes here and there, something that I would stumble upon on that application. But definitely not doing heavy open source.
Okay, yeah. That's more than most people, but like most people make it into their career and don't do any open source at all. So that's still something. So a little bit open source. Um, you said that you were having a well, you weren't ever able to get a job in Brazil because you have to move, or because you were too young, or because like the inexperience. Do you think that was the experience of pretty much everyone who does software in Brazil, or like, can you kind of give me an idea? Like, I'm from the U.S., so like, what's sort of the situation for someone who wants to go into computers in Brazil?
So nowadays it is it we have a very good ecosystem. Back then, that's 2015, 2016. The largest companies are going to be located in the southeast. Um, Back then, remote wasn't a thing. Like you had some people working remotely, but if you really wanted to get a good job, you had to move. I didn't want to because I was going to college, and like if that was the only way I would move, let's say I didn't get the US job and I kept applying, and someone said, "Hey, we're going to give you a job if you move here," I would go. But I live in the north in Brazil, which is a poorer region and less technically advanced. Um, Nowadays, we do have lots of gigs here, lots of programming gigs here. But if you want the good jobs, you gotta move to the southeast. If they're not remote gigs. Um, so that was sort of the situation back then. I'm sure that I could have found something here if I looked a little bit further. But I was just getting frustrated because I would apply and I would make those custom cover letters and a good resume, and so and I get apply something. Oh, we really like you, but I think you're too young. I'm like, okay, that's really really frustrating. And in my mind, I had kind of sort of given up, and I would still keep applying, but I was just expecting to go through college, finish that, and then maybe look for something. But yeah, back then it wasn't as advanced as it is today. But nowadays we do have really great tech here. Elixir, for example, the language is a Brazilian language. Lua is a Brazilian language. Uh, Datomic, the database, is owned by a Brazilian company, Nubank. So we do have a really great tech hub nowadays. Um, you know, you can definitely make a really good career in Brazil if you focus on the right companies.
Gotcha. One other thing, did you actually finish at college, or did you end up dropping
No,
out?
no, I dropped out. I dropped out. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. What was your while you were in college? What was your actual declared degree?
It was computer science. So I only got halfway through the first semester. So, you know, but it was fun. At some point, I still wanted to finish it or either switch to something like math. But, there's no way I'm working and also study math. It's
Yeah,
impossible.
yeah, for real. There's a lot of investment involved in a math degree.
Exactly.
Do you think one day maybe you'll go back and try and get that degree?
I don't know. I've started to. So, something that I've noticed in the last few years is that I do have lots of gap in my knowledge, especially when it comes to computer science, which I think is natural. If you're working with web development, you're going to be focused on other things. You're not going to be focused on, I don't know, bit shifts and bitmaps and how CPU works, that sort of thing. You're going to be focused on the business perspective of an application, that sort of thing, which is what I focus on, and it's what I really, really enjoy is architecture, the sort of thing. But I've came to realize that I've had this massive gaps. For example, I didn't know how memory paging worked or how CPUs worked, and I don't think you need to learn those to be good at your job. Like I think I'm very competent even before I knew that. Um, but I kind of I said, do I want to go back to college? Do I have the time to go back to college and focus on that, or do I want to just go through a course online and start learning these things little by little? And the problem with the latter is it's really, really hard to have the drive to, sit down every day after work and go through a college lesson. I see a lot of people on Twitter saying, hey, you don't have to go to college. You can just do this MIT course. But I really, really doubt that you're going to sit down every week and do the MIT course unless you have to, unless you're enrolled in university and you have to, you don't have a way out. So it's been hard, but I've been watching lessons every week on some of the basics and kind of building up the knowledge. I'm still nowhere near a computer science graduate, but I do know my way around internals. I do know how kernels work now, this sort of thing, which is fun. I'm not doing this because it's going to have an impact in my career directly. Like, I don't think I'm going to make more money out of this or anything like that. But it's really, really fun. And I think that's one of the benefits you have by not being in university. You don't have to do all of the courses. You can pick the ones that are fun, but you also got to have them. I'm looking for a word here and I can't recall what it is, but you also got to be able to pick the ones you don't like but are essential. You're always going to have that, like discrete math. I don't want to learn that, but I know I'm going to need it to learn some more advanced topics. Um, and it's really, really hard to do that by yourself because I don't know what I don't know. you know so how am I going to pick the subjects I should learn if I don't know what my gaps are? With college, you don't have an option. You're going to have your subjects, you're going to have your professor teaching you something, and you're just going to learn it all. So you know um, I'm going through them. It's really, really hard, especially to have that drive to sit down after work and learn something that's not directly related to your work skills. But I think it's very, very worth it, especially if you have fun with it. And I have been having a lot of fun learning the basics. Um, so, long story short, like I'm not looking to have the complete skill set of a computer science graduate, but I want to at least know the basics just to be able to, if one day I want to venture myself with, I don't know, let's say that I want to go deep within Erlang processes. I want to at least know where to start from, where to look for things. And it's just fun. And there are lots, like nowadays there are so many great resources on YouTube that, like, I'm not that guy, but I'm sure there's someone in some place in the world who's like 11 years old and has a massive drive and just going through all of these playlists and doing a computer science graduation in like a year. Um, it's really amazing what we've come to. So yeah, like I don't think I'll be going back unless for some reason I win the lotto and I have a lot of time on my hands. But I've been trying to learn a few things here and there. My math knowledge is really, really behind the graduate level. So I used to study math before college, but I've forgotten a lot of it. So when it comes to more advanced topics, I just do not have the necessary math background, and I think it's going to take a few years for me to start going through that.
Nice. Yeah, I think as someone who did a computer science degree, like with the drive that you have, like I don't think you ever really need one. Like honestly, I think you could make it just as far as you could with one, but that's just an opinion of mine.
Yeah,
Um,
I do not disagree. I'm sure you can just learn things as you go. Like I said, I don't think it's going to have a real impact on my day job, but some things are fun, and you know, maybe the fun thing for you isn't computer science or math. Maybe you're a programmer and you want to learn psychology or something like that. Um, Nowadays, it's really, really great that you can just go into the internet and look for something, and I mean, you can always find some guy on YouTube who's 14 years old and knows so much more than you giving you a lesson. But you can also find lessons from, Harvard or MIT or Princeton, and you can literally watch the same thing the students watch. Um, so if you have that determination and the other word I'm not recalling right now, it's really, really impressive what you can do nowadays with a computer and some notes.
yeah. All right. So let's jump back to your progression now. So you've been kind of working through, you've been going and you've been every company, you said every place you've worked, every job you've done now at this point has been through referrals. You haven't really been applying anymore. It's just been someone comes to you. So your company that you built, it's it's kind of it's it's gone now. Is that kind of what I'm understanding?
No, so we kept that going. We were doing relatively well 2020, and then COVID happened. So early 2020, we were already thinking about we couldn't sell the company because the asset is not the code; it's the customers on the ticketing space. So it doesn't really matter if you have the greatest tech, and we had really good tech. I think in Brazil we had one platform that was better than we were. We had really really good tech. We had authenticators that worked offline and online. Um, we had what is it called, conflict solving. So let's say that you have two authenticators and you've authenticated the same ticket. We had conflict resolution, that sort of thing. It was pretty cool, but that's not the asset. So we started thinking about selling just because it's a really, really hard space to navigate unless you have the proper connections. And one thing that we did have that was really, really good was we had an anti-fraud system. Um, we had previously used some companies to hand frauds like Swift Science, and those companies work really well. The services work really well, but not in Brazil. Um, so we had sort of built our own uh, anti-fraud service, which it wasn't super complex, but it was basically this massive workflow that did lots of things. So if you've purchased a ticket in, let's say, Rio, uh, does your IP match Rio? Um, does the card holder information match your information? And then we had lots of checks, and basically we would build up a score. If the score was higher than some threshold, which I can't remember what it was, we would trigger some manual information verification. So we would send you an email saying, hey, can you please reply to this email with your ID and the last four digits of your card? Um, and that was pretty cool. We used some OCR to check that. And if it matched, we would uh, give the green light for that order. If it didn't match, it would go for manual resolution, and then someone would go through their info and see if it was fraud or not. And in Brazil, that in our situation, that pretty much eliminated fraud. So what we were looking to sell was actually the anti-fraud system, and we had some conversations going, and then we had COVID, and COVID annihilated the event space. So we just decided, you know what, it's not even worth pursuing this. Let's just pay everyone we owe as the clients, like do all of the payouts, block the platform for taking new events, and then work with on a migration plan for our existing clients. And we just settled on a loss there. That was 2020, a little bit before after COVID. I want to say we shut down in May, May or June.
Okay. Yeah. So what was the experience going through COVID like as a software developer in Brazil? Was it pretty bad, pretty good?
I mean, as a software developer, it wasn't bad because I already worked remotely, so nothing really changed for me. Um, in fact, I mean, I've always hated switching jobs. I don't like interviewing. I don't like. One of the things I hate the most is, you get into a team, you meet people, you become friends with them, and then you leave. Um, so I've always avoided that. But if anything, it became easier to be a software developer during COVID because you know ZERP era, lots of money flowing in, everyone's hiring, great salaries. I didn't take advantage of that, which in hindsight, maybe that was a bad decision, but it wasn't problematic at all. My job stayed as it was. The company I was working on actually started making more money because of COVID. It was an online education company, so more money flowing in, people looking to do courses. We had a SaaS as well. So, you know, I don't want to word this wrongly, but from a business perspective, it was sort of positive. Um, but for myself, it didn't really change anything.
Okay, nice. So this learning platform that you're working at now, this is the one that your friend uh, like reached out to you about?
Yeah, that's the one that I started. No, sorry. I started working on at a company in 2018 that was basically an SMS platform for you to do marketing. So, I have this list of 30 million contacts. I want to upload them into the platform. I want to send an SMS to people who live in 30 miles out of Austin between 30 and 45 years old, who are female, that sort of thing. Um, I left this project in 2020, late 2020, and I started working at this education company. Um, it was an education company. They basically did courses, but I joined to help them build a SaaS. Basically, one of the things they always promoted on their courses were platforms like ClickFunnels. Um, and they figured, okay, if we're just promoting ClickFunnels, why don't we build our own, right? And that's what I joined to help build. So by the time COVID hit, um, I was still working on the SMS company, but late 2020, I jumped to this new company, which happened to have one of the partners was also one of the partners on the SMS company.
Okay, interesting. So I imagine an SMS company in the height of the lockdowns is probably like a really great business model. What was sort of your reasoning? Like, what was it that made you decide that it was time to leave that company to move to something new?
Yeah, I mean the software was already working very well. It was fairly stable. The problem with that business was there were four partners, and they started to have some disagreements, and I just didn't want to, I didn't want to stay there and figure it out. So when I got the offer to jump ship to the other company, one of the partners was also one of the partners on the SMS company. He is super chill. It's someone I liked, and said, okay, I think this might be the time for me to switch companies. But I don't know what I don't know what happened to the SMS company at the end of it all. But I think they split their partnerships. So um, each one took a copy of the software and started running their own businesses.
Oh, wow. Okay. Nice. So you moved to this new platform. You're building a SaaS, which is pretty common, especially for remote work, right?
Yeah.
What is sort of your role at this company?
Yeah, at the beginning it was the only engineer. So the idea was, can we get an MVP out of this? And if we do get the MVP, then we can start allocating more resources. So we had a deadline. I think it was April 2021 to get something working, something the users can log into, add their own sites, add their own tracking, that sort of thing, receive payments, all of that. So at the beginning, my job was I was pretty much the only engineer on this platform, and we still had the other platform, which was the actual learning platform, the actual course platform, which also did lots of other things like ad tracking and whatnot. Which had, I want to say at the time, 8 engineers. Um, so my focus was on the SaaS. Once the SaaS was done, I started slowly transitioning uh, and started playing with both platforms. So once we reached a stable-ish version of the SaaS platform, which took much longer than a year, that was, I want to say 2023. I started splitting my time between the two. The other platform was a very, very legacy PHP application. So my role at that side of thing was to modernize it. So, set up Composer, set up some code standards, start re-architecting it to be even able to take a framework, um, lots of performance fixes. It was a lot of things, but I don't think I've ever received like a proper title. My title was lead software developer on the SaaS, which then took some extra engineers. So I think at some point we had 4 engineers on the SaaS and 9 or 10 on the other platform. And then it just kind of kept going between them. So on the SaaS platform, I was the lead. On the content platform, um, I was the lead when it comes to restructuring the application, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So is this the company you're at currently?
No, no, I left
No.
in July.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that then. So you've built a lot of this. A lot of people in the developer space really like ownership. Like they like to have something that they've built that they're able to. One guy that I interviewed said that you don't really get influence over a code base until the legacy code is code that you wrote.
Right.
Um, so you've got that now. You're kind of in like the best case scenario. Why do you decide that it's time to move on from this company?
Um, that's a good question, and it's something that I ask myself quite a lot. So I wasn't actively looking for a job, and then someone from the company I'm currently at reached out to me, and they're big on the Laravel space. You know, it's a Laravel shop. Um, and I said, why not? Let's take this interview. The worst that can happen is I stay at your company. And we had the interview, and it was just a great interview. I felt that the challenges they're facing are much more interesting than the ones I was facing at the previous company. You know, things were stable. There really wasn't a lot to do. Um, the restructuring of the legacy application, it's we already had a roadmap. There wasn't anything new coming. It's just a matter of keep working on it. So I was feeling that I wasn't really upping my skills or that I wasn't making a huge difference. I do think I made a lot of difference when I joined because I introduced all of these new things and I helped them figure out what to move towards. Uh, but at that point in time, I thought I was just sort of a code monkey. I already knew what we had to do for the next year and a half. We just had to write code. Um, and I didn't think I was the best fit either for the company, uh, nor did I think that I was upping my skills and contributing with something meaningful. So I wasn't actively looking for a gig. The current company just happened to reach out. We had a conversation and it felt you know how it is. Sometimes you have an interview and you just do not click with the people. You just go, okay, that's not for me. But on this one, everyone was really nice. They have some really interesting challenges. A lot of them are similar to some challenges we face on the SMS company, especially the scale side of things. So it just seemed like a really great opportunity, something that a team that I can contribute with. And I think the skills I've had at the time and right now it's only been 3 months, really fit with the challenges of the company. So, we had I had a call with the CEO, not an interview, just a casual talk, and it felt really well. And I said, okay, this might be going somewhere. And then I had the interview with some other folks in the company, and I really, really liked all of them. And like I told you, I've always avoided changing companies. But I felt that this was the time. This was the first time I actually switched companies in my life. That I've decided to jump ship. Um, and I think it was the right choice. The other company had a stable code base, a stable roadmap. Things were, in order. So yeah, I think that's sort of it. If I had to sum it up, it's I thought that the company I'm at could use my skills more, and I think the challenge is more interesting for where I stand right now.
All right, yeah. Something that I've noticed, and I'm curious to see if you've noticed it as well. When you're about to change jobs, like from the time when you first kind of get that offer to interview, that offer to go talk with somebody at another company, to the time that you actually accept an offer and leave your previous company, there's like a click. Like it sort of like changes how you view your current company sometimes. Do you feel like from the time when you first had that call with the COO to the time that you left, that you sort of like started to see things at your current company that you hadn't noticed before?
I don't think that happened for me. There are lots of things I've noticed for a while when it comes to inefficiency and whatnot. And this company I was at, it grew really quickly. It went from 30 folks to 200 in 7 months. So it had lots of structural problems, but I think that's normal for any company that grows that quickly. Um, I do something that I felt a little bit. I felt a little bit guilty, you know, for leaving my team, that sort of thing. And I think that's one of the reasons I've always avoided changing companies. I've always had it feel like I'm betraying someone, even though I'm not. It's a company. It's great to work with people you like, but at the end of the day, it's a company. If you're respectful and the only thing I don't think you should do is just leave out of the blue, like unless that's the only way up for some reason. But if you can give them some notice, write some documents on how to proceed without you, do some knowledge transfer, the kind of thing. I think if you do that nowadays, I think that's totally fair. But back then, I for some reason I had this feeling that I was betraying someone, and I think a lot of that was the fact, like you mentioned, ownership. So I was the one that knew the most about the software, and we had documentation. I didn't think it was enough. I thought it was enough until I was going to leave. Um, and then I started thinking, okay, is it enough? Are people going to be able to maintain this without me? And they were. So that wasn't a problem.
All right. So now we come to the hard questions. So you have lived a long, full developer career already. But if everything just goes perfectly, everything like every chance you take from here on out just goes in your favor, uh, where do you want to be in the future? Like, what's the goal state? Maybe it's with this company, maybe it's another company, but where do you want to go with your career?
That's a good question. I've always liked the more technical side of things. And I think at the current company, there's still a lot of room for that. It's a complex project with lots of people, lots of good, really, really good people, much smarter than I am. And so there's a lot for me to learn there as well. Um, for the foreseeable future, I see myself in this company. But I also want to increase what I've been doing on the education side. So I've been creating videos for, geez, 9 years now, 8 years, 8 years now. But I've never really allocated a good chunk of my time for that. I've always done videos here and there, a series here and there, my Loracast series as well. Um, I do love this side of things, and I want to start creating content at a more frequent pace, if that makes sense. So that's something I want to do on the side. I have to organize myself and figure out how to do that. But for the next year or so, especially for 2025, I want to give that a little bit more focus.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. So then the follow up question, what are you doing like today, this week, that's pointing your career and your life towards that goal?
That's a really good question. What am I doing this week? Well, I've started recording a series that I hope to record at least the first 5 episodes this week. It's a pretty technical one, pretty tough one, so hopefully that will work. I'll be traveling next week um, to meet the team actually. So I want to do that before I travel, so that when I come back, I can just edit it and publish some stuff. But yeah, I've just been really really inconsistent with videos, and one of the reasons is I guess most of my videos are on the more technical side, and they're usually one-off videos. There's this concept, I record a video on it, that's it. So there's nowhere to go from there. Whereas with series, if you're gonna make a series on anything, like let's say you want to make a series on event-driven architectures, um, you have where to go from video to video, which makes things a little bit more predictable. So I guess I feel that's what I need to do. I need to move from these one-off videos to series about a deeper subject. Um, and yeah, that's my goal for 2025. It's figure out what those subjects are. What are the things that I'm, happy and excited to talk about, and that I think are not. I don't want to. This might sound like I'm an ass, but I don't want to create content about something that everyone's already doing. you already have tons of videos about how to create a basic React application. Um, I think there's still value in someone really good at React also recording that. So I'm not saying that it isn't valuable to create content in something that already exists a lot, but it doesn't get me pumped up. So I want to figure out what subjects on the more advanced side get me pumped up and which ones would be beneficial for the majority of the community. Because you can always talk about things that are interesting, but are gonna be a niche audience, like let's say Kafka with Laravel. That's a very niche audience. Uh, and that is not to say it wouldn't be good to have videos on that. I think it would be amazing to have videos on that. But you know, I try not to talk much about this, but when you're creating videos, as much as I like creating videos on niche stuff, on some stuff that I like, if there's no reward, you do get frustrated. At least I do. So sometimes I record a video on something I really enjoy, and that's a little bit complicated, and I think it's going to be super helpful, and you get 300 views. And then you record a video on something really basic, and you get 7,000 views. So I know it's how the game is. That's how the game's played. Uh, but I want to try and not be frustrated so that I can keep going. You know, at least with me, when I get frustrated, I go, okay, maybe I'm going to record this at a later week or something like that. Um, so I want to try and manage that. My expectation on the results of a video, and I know people are going to say, just do it for yourself. It doesn't really matter who watch it, but I do think it does, because at least with me, I want my videos to be seen. I spent a lot of time on that. I want them to be seen. So I'm trying to manage my expectations with the sort of content that drives that audience, and try to find a middle ground, if that makes sense. Um, Again, I'm very wordy, but to answer your question, what I'm doing this week to achieve the goal is to record the first half of the series.
Gotcha. So kind of like thinking about all that, would you say maybe there's sort of like a fear aspect when it comes to making videos? Because there's like a commitment, right? Like making a video is a commitment, editing a video is a commitment, a series is like a multiplier on those commitments. And if you end up investing tons and tons of time into something, and then, like you said, it gets 300 views, I'm going to be honest with you, I've made like 4 videos, and I don't think all of them together have 300 views. So I can feel you there. Um, but there's sort of this like fear that it's not going to pay off. And on some level, it's almost like if I don't make the video, then I don't ever have to worry about that pain of it not paying off. And then sometimes that wins.
I think I'm sort of past that stage, but the calculation that I sort of do in my head is, if I were to spend time on this video, that means I'm spending less time with my wife, or that I'm spending less time doing something like powerlifting, or playing guitar or something like that. So you know, for the purists out there, it's gonna sound off, but I sort of did that calculation in my head. Is it worth it? And my problem with the kinds of videos that I record is, there's a lot of upfront investment in setting up the project. If I want to talk about something like, let's say, aggregates, um, from domain-driven design, it doesn't work with a simple project. So I have to spend time creating a playground that is a little bit more complex than most applications, so that I can then present the concept. And that's where I end up actually spending most of my time when recording these videos. Recording the video is fine. I'm going to take 30 minutes, an hour, and then maybe 1 to 2 hours editing it. But setting up the context for the video to make sense, that's where I spend time. So I think with a series, that's a little bit more predictable, because if I can think of 10 to 15 videos that fit within the same context and are related to one another, then, I'm going to spend the time setting up the context once for the first video, and then I'm going to go from there, which is what I did with the Laracast series, which is about modularization. Um, I needed to add some context to have something to modularize, but from there, each video just goes one after the other. And you know I think it also makes more sense to the viewer, when you have that additional context. not to say that this one off did not, but when you can see the code evolve from video 1 to video 15 and you have 14 videos in between, it allows the user to see the results of whatever you're teaching. Um, Whereas when it's just a one-off video, sometimes I love to make really complex and appropriate examples for every video, but I don't have infinite time. So sometimes I just have to do something simple and let the viewer think of what that will look like in real life in their complex project, right? Um, which is not ideal, but it's what I can do with my time. So I think for me, doing series would be a way to optimize my time. And I also think there's a commitment from my side to finish the series. If I've done 3 videos and I should have done 10, I've already done 3. I'm going to do the other 7 because otherwise I'm not going to publish the first 3 and my time will be wasted. Um, so, maybe I'm just thinking too much and this isn't going to work out. But I think for the kind of content that I do, series just fit it better. If that
Gotcha.
makes any sense, and maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Um, so, on top of videos, have you done any work in any languages outside of the web space?
I've done work in, I mean, no, I've done Elixir, but on the web space. I've done Ruby, but on the web space. Uh, I've done Go, but also on the web space. Go was something you used for the SMS stuff at some point. So it wasn't literally used to interact with clients, but it wasn't in an HTTP context, but it was still in for the web. So that's another thing that I'm very interested at. I haven't touched Elixir in a few years professionally, but I still find it the most underrated language ever. So I would love to do not necessarily professionally, but I do want to make something with Elixir, either a pet project or something just to have fun. Um, a friend of mine, Sean McCall, who's big in the PHP community, has recently started doing a lot of things with Elixir, and just following him along is so much fun. You know, when I've done Elixir, I was shocked at how simple the language was, and it has lots of simple primitives, building blocks, and then you can do really complex stuff with that. Uh, padding matching in Elixir is just insane. Uh, for you, that's probably just the usual because of functional programming. But for someone who was coming from PHP back then, that was just mind blowing. Um, so I still have a lot of faith in Elixir, and I think at some point people are going to realize that Elixir is it's fantastic. Um, so yeah, I guess outside of the web space, I do want to make something with Elixir. Sean has been doing some local network stuff with Elixir. So he has this little agent that keeps sending him information about the traffic and whatnot. So I'll see if I can come up with something similar just to get my chops up because it's been what 4 years since I've done Elixir, so I don't really remember a lot. Um, and then I also want to start touching some functional programming stuff besides Elixir, either Camel or Haskell or something like that. Not for any specific reason, just because I think it's something that would be fun to learn. It's very, very different from what I'm used to, and even though Elixir is functional, it still feels like Ruby to me. So it's not that much of what's the word I'm looking for here? Of a change. It is, but it isn't. So Haskell, on the other hand, or OCaml, I don't even know how to learn that thing. So I would have to sort of learn from scratch. And that's one thing that I forgot to talk about. I think learning things from scratch is really, really fun. Um, I remember that I did a video on how arrays work internally in PHP. And I didn't know how arrays worked internally in PHP. I knew the concept, but I didn't know what the code looked like. So I had to learn C, which is something that I've never properly learned. Um, and learning things from scratch is so much fun. It feels. I'm trying to think of the proper sentiment here, but it's frustrating and exciting at the same time when I a professional programmer who did this for a living cannot get a basic C program to compile. Um, so I think I'm going to have the same feeling with other languages. Um, Something like OCaml or Haskell or I don't know, even Crystal is something that I've been, even though it looks a lot like Ruby, it's something that I've been wanting to learn for a while. And I'm actually going to rephrase that. If I had really been wanting to learn, I would have learned already. Um, so it's something that I will learn. I'll have to pick one of them, and I will learn one of them this year.
Gotcha. I mean, I'm gonna obviously shill for OCaml since that's my language of choice, even though I don't work professionally in OCaml, and their docs are really good. Um, yeah, but that's actually a really good question though that I do want to kind of touch on. So let's imagine for a moment, right? Like your new company spins off a new project, and they have decided that it's going to be built in OCaml, and they want you to lead the project. What is your game plan for getting up to speed in OCaml as quickly as possible?
That's a good question. I think what I would do is I would spend 2 weeks just doing OCaml nonstop. You know, that's really how I learned most of the things I know. I just said, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm just going to do this for 4 days straight. Um, and I think, honestly, I think that's one of the best ways to do it because you're just going to stumble on errors and you're going to figure that out, and you can stumble upon more errors and you're going to figure that out, and you're just going to keep doing that in a loop until you know how to do things. Something that I see a lot of people saying is every language the same. You just change the syntax, and I don't think that's quite true. I think that doesn't really go far, to be honest. Sure, the syntax is going to be different, but the entire programming model is also going to be different. Sure, if you're comparing, I don't know, C sharp with Java, maybe it's similar. If you're comparing Ruby with Crystal, it's simple. But if you're comparing OCaml with PHP, it doesn't have a lot in common. Um, so I see some people trying to learn new language this way. I'm just going to assume that I know how it works. I just don't know the syntax, and it doesn't go very far because this statement is false. You don't really know it. So what's worked for me is just sit down, figure out a project. Um, there's this great site. I just forgot the name. Code Crafters. Not sure if you've heard of it.
I
Um,
don't know that I have.
and they basically have this project. It's really, really cool. It's something like building Redis or building an HTTP server or building a database. I don't know if this one exists, just an example. And they have them in various flavors. So, build a Redis program. You can do it in Go, you can do it in Elixir, you can do it in PHP, you can do it in Ruby, whatever you want to pick. So nowadays, maybe that would be my go-to approach to learn something new. It's an interesting project. It's not one of those pet projects that doesn't really do anything. It's actually meaningful. Um, and most of them are deep enough, are low level enough to get you into the inner workings of the languages. So, yeah, I would just sit down. I don't think there's another way to learn something. You can try doing some hacks like you see on Twitter, and speed read a book or something like that. But at the end of the day, you're just gonna have to sit down and go through the language. And I see some people trying to say, oh, you can just use an LLM to learn the language. But I think that's a really bad way of learning something because you're not really gonna learn anything. Um, and it's not what we're talking about exactly, but that's something I've been feeling a lot with LMs. If it's just spitting out code and you're just reading it, it's not the same thing. It doesn't go into your brain the same way as writing it. You don't get that muscle memory. Um, so yeah, I think at the end of the day, there's no way around it. You have to sit down and you have to keep trying things and being frustrated with it. Um, and at some point, you're going to notice that you're actually good at it. So yeah, that's what I would do. I just sit down and play with it. Would I be good at all camo in 2 weeks? Probably not. But I guess I'll be able to write something.
There's no way to know. Well, you just have to do it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right. So those are the questions that I had for you. Thank you so much for coming and chatting with me. Your story's incredible, as is
Thanks for
everyone's.
having me, man. That was a lot of fun.